Welcome back, this is a continuation of the second part. If you haven't seen it, click in the banner above and come back to this video. So in the last video, we just finished our add person function, and now it's time to start on our edit person. So let's just start going through our bullet points. So the first thing to do is check if people in the system. We can do that by a simple if statement. So we can type in people.count is equal to 0, and then we can just give out a new message saying, no users to edit, use the menu to add a user. And it can be really that simple, and let's just give it a test. So when our program first loads, we have no users in the system, so we should see this message immediately, which we do, and it seems to be okay. Now let's just add a user. Let's successfully added a user, and let's just try and edit the user, and now it comes up with nothing. As long as we haven't hit this line, then we know it's working so far. The reason it came up with nothing is because, well, we haven't programmed it yet. So let's do that next part. So if the count is equal to 0, then there's no users. But if the count is not equal to 0, then there must be users in the system. So this is where this path comes in. So now that we've done this, we can print all of the users. So we already have a print all users function that we defined up here. So now the issue is, we've already ruled out 0 people. We don't want to have our start option printing, and we don't have our finish option printing. So all we really need is the bit of code that prints out the users. So let's copy this for loop and let's place it into our edit function. As soon as we pasted this for loop, we've automatically just created a duplication of code. And this is really bad. So let's stop and let's make a new function. We can call this a public void, and we can just say print all users. And it can be that for loop on its own. It doesn't have to be anything special. We're just reducing the amount of code that we have to write and the amount of errors that we might cause in our code. So instead of having all of this, we can have a print all users, and then also in our print all function, we want to replace this as well with our print all users. And just a quick tip while I'm here, if you have an if statement that only has one line in the body, then you can actually remove the curly braces. And also another quick tip, if you want to remove one single line of code that your cursor is currently selected on, you can press Ctrl followed by the L key, and it'll get rid of it. So if we do that for both of the if statements, then you can see the if statement is a lot neater. If you prefer this approach, then you can stick with it. So let's get back to the edit function. So after we've printed all of the users, then we need to be able to allow a selection. So what that means is the print all users is going to return us back with a list of users. And it's going to be one based, is 1 dot the person, 2 dot the person, and the reason it's 1 base is because our people list is actually 0 based, and our integer is 0 base as well, but we output it to the screen with a +1 because humans like lists beginning with 1 and computers like lists beginning with 0. So let's get back to our edit function, and let's just remove the right from the right line, and we can say enter an index, and then we can read it in using integer index selection equals, and then we can say console.readline, and our readline function actually returns back a string, so we'd need to wrap that inside of a convert to int32. There we go. So we're taking our string, converting it to an integer using our convert int32, and we're storing it inside of index selection. One thing to note, I'm using convert int32 here instead of using try parse like we use in the menu, just to make the code a little bit shorter and to make the video a little bit shorter for you guys. If you wanted to implement a safe conversion, then you can follow the same approach that we did in this if statement, and you'll make sure that your code doesn't cause exceptions. But just to make sure, what we can do is we can include a simple try. We can have try, and then if you press tab, then we have our boilerplate code in here, and inside the exception, this is when we output a message, and we can just say something went wrong, and then we can call the function again, edit person. And then the code that can potentially go wrong is these two lines. Let's put it inside the try. And just to demonstrate what's happening here, we can type in edit users. Oh, we need to add some users. And while we're at this point, let's just add in the hard-coded data that we added towards the start, just so we don't have to keep creating users every time we launch the system. So we can press 3 for edit user, and if we type an index, something like hi, then something went wrong, try again, and it'll just loop it back around, and that's a lot easier. So you either have the option of using the try parse, or you can have the option of doing something like a try catch. That's up to you really. Both approaches are very sensible, and it's up to the user what they want to implement. So now that we've allowed a selection, we need to validate the selection. So what that means is, when they've entered a value, This is going to be based off the list that's printed in the print all users. But now we have a problem. The print all users goes from 1 to 2, but our list goes from 0 to 1. Like we said before, our list is 0 based, but our output is human based, which is 1 based. So all we need to do here is actually take this value and minus 1 from it. So we have 3 options that we can do for this, and I'll talk you through all of them so you know which ones are available. We have the first one that I don't like using. You can say a variable equals its own value minus 1. The other option you have as well is by saying index selection equals minus 1, which does exactly the same. It's just this is a shorthand for this line. It saves you typing out the variable name twice in the same line. This gives you a bit more flexibility when you want to minus something like 100. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the most preferred option that I like is minus minus. Index selection minus minus. And all this will do is take 1 from this value. If you want to delete more than 1, then you'd have to use this approach or this approach. If I'm only minusing by 1, then I'd always use minus minus. If I'm going anything above 1 or under 1, then I'd always use this approach. This approach is very long because you have to remember to type out the variable name twice. Minus equals is very easy to remember, and it's actually available in all the different flavors. So you can have plus equals, and then you can have times equals, and then you can have divide equals. So you can have all 4 operations like this. And remember, these lines are exactly the same as this. So just to demonstrate, that will be equal to plus, like that, and you get the point. You just substitute that value inside here, and it makes things a lot easier. So I'll just keep that up just so you can see it for reference, but we'll only be referring to this one. So now that we've converted our 1 based index into a 0 based index, now we need to check to make sure that the value after this minus 1 is actually still correct, depending on the range of our people. So as of right now, because we've hard-coded our 2 users into the system, then our list goes from position 0 to position 1, as it says here. So let's run an if statement that says if the index selection is greater than or equal to 0, and the index selection is less than or equal to people.count minus 1. And the reason why we minus 1 is people.count will return as a human number. So if we have 0 and 1, that's 2 users in the system. So people.count will return us back with 2, so we need to minus 1 from this value to get the upper bound. And inside here, let's just make sure that it's returned back the correct value and our range check has passed. In the else, we'll just make sure that our valid check-in is working. So let's run the program and let's give this a try. Edit user, type in 1, we have yay. Edit user again, type in 2, we have yay. And let's try some bad values like 0, sad face. And let's try 1 above the count, 3, sad face. And let's just try something else like 1,000. And that all seems to work okay. So now that we've passed our range check, let's just make sure that the user knows what's going on. So we can type in output message, and we can say enter a valid index range, and then we can return the function edit person again, and then when we try this again, you'll see that the output is a lot better. Enter a valid index range, and then please try again, and it'll loop around and it'll keep doing this until indeed you select something proper and it'll work. And again, once you press enter, we have this error again where we're showing this option twice, and the reason why is because we have it at the bottom. The only success path so far is the yay path, so let's only include finish option within yay. We don't want to be calling it at the end, because then even if you return an error, it will still call at the end of the function when everything else is finished, whereas we only want to finish the option once everything has been successful. So far in the function, we've checked the people, we've printed, we've allowed the selection, and we've validated the selection. Just realized that our remove user comment is actually meant to say edit user. So what we've achieved now is we've checked the people, we've printed, allowed the selection, validated the selection, and now we just need to edit the user and then print the message to say it's successful and return back to the menu. So it's just this last one left because returning back to the menu has already been taken care of. So let's jump back into here. So after we've outputted yay, we can remove this because we know that if we're inside this path, then everything has been successful up until this point. So in order to edit a user, we essentially need all of the details again. The function is going to look very, very similar to this. We will need them to enter a name and enter an age, and then we'll need to construct a person and then assign it to that index position instead of adding a new one. What we can do, instead of copy and pasting this entire code, because you know what's going to happen, we're going to need to create a function. So let's create a function that can return us back a person. So let's try and make that now, and bear with me because this might get a little bit quick. Let's go at the end and we can make a public void return person. But of course we don't need it to be a void, we actually need it to be a person because we want a person back. In this function, it's going to be very similar to what we did up here. So let's take this entire try catch and let's paste it below and let's see what we need for both the edit and the add functions, and let's extract the rest. So we don't need to print that we successfully added a person, and we don't need to add a person to the list, and we definitely don't want to finish the option. Let's remove all of them for now. And inside our function, we don't really want to be doing the catch exception because, as you can see, this is very specific to the add person. So what we could do instead is remove these, remove the try, and then if we highlight the entire code, because now it's not indented correctly, if we press the end and then hold shift and press just before the C, and then we can press shift tab to indent it properly. So now let's see what we can change as well. We continuously have references to add person. This is not good, so we're going to have to remove them. So now we're looking a lot better. We don't need to create a variable here because all we're going to be doing is returning. But you could do if you wanted to. You could say return person, or you could simply put this code back into here. I like this because it returns us back with one line and we don't have to have another line just so it's easier to read in the future. So now we can enter a name, an age, validate them both, and then return a person if it's successful. Now it's complaining because not all the code paths return a value. Because if the string is in a bad format or the integer is in a bad format, it's going to hit these two lines and then it's going to jump out to here at the end of the function and nothing is going to be returned. So it's complaining because we need a return value at the end of the function. So what you tend to do in these approaches is if everything's been successful, then you return back a real value. And if things have not been successful, e.g. you've came into the bottom of the function, then we can return null. And null is just a blank object. I put it one line too short, it's in this line instead. So if everything has been successful, we return a new person. And if we ever reach the bottom of this function, that really means that we've either went into this path or we've went into this path and we've hit our null. Okay, let's try and integrate this new function into our add person and just make sure that works before we move into the edit. So as you can see, we already have a lot of the code that we have down there. So let's remove all the duplications. So all of the name and age validations in here, we can get rid of. And everything above to do with reading the name, we can also get rid of. Validating the age, we can get rid of. And again, we can highlight the code, shift tab twice to get it in the right indent and just remove these empty spaces. Now let's see how we can tweak this to give us what we need. So we don't need to make a new person because we've just created a function that makes the person for us. So instead of making the person here, we can actually call the return person function. And now that looks like it's working. What if this return person returns back a null? We can't just add a null because that's really bad. So what we can do in here, if the person is not equal to a null object, then we can place our curly braces and then we can add these three lines straight in the middle. If the person is not null, then we want to add them, tell the user, and finish the option and return to the menu. Now, if the user is indeed null, that means there's been an error in returning the person. So if they've returned the person incorrectly, we can output a message and just say something has went wrong. And then we can loop back around to add person. Let's give this a shot and make sure it works. Hit F5 to run the code. Now we can add a user using 2. And let's type in hello, 30, successfully added a person. And let's just use option 1 to make sure they're there. And it seems like they are. And let's just try again. Abu, 25. and it seems to add the person successfully, and it seems to add them in the list and print them out successfully as well. So it appears that this function now works. Now you can see that this code is very, very small. So we can take this approach and paste this into our edit. We can make use of this try catch because we want to be looping around if something goes wrong in here as well. So instead of add person, we can change these to edit person. And the message still stays the same because they're catching the same errors. And we can remove finish option from down here because this is the new success path. So if we've managed to return a person successfully, then what we want to do, instead of adding a person, we want to actually do an edit. But how do we do an edit? When accessing the people inside the people object, we can use the people keyword that we've made, and then instead of using a dot operator, we can actually place the square brackets. The square brackets gives us access to an index, and that is perfect because we have our index selection that the user's already picked from. So we can say the index selection. So we can take the element that's stored inside the index selection of the people and assign it straight to the person. And that executes an edit straight in one line. Now we don't need the add line anymore, so we can remove that. And then we can change our success message to edit to the person. And then we can run our finish option because everything has went fine. I know this function has been a little bit long and we'll recap it in a second. Let's just make sure everything works. So let's print our users and just see that we have Abbe23 and test10. So let's try and edit them, and then let's try and edit the test, and we'll lowercase the name and change the age to 30, and successfully edit the person. Press enter, and let's go back to option 1 and make sure that's worked. And it's clear that it has. So let's review the code. So we've edited the user now, we've printed the message, and we've successfully returned back to the menu. So now our edit person function is complete. If the people count is 0, then we let the user know, and then we can jump all the way to the end of the edit user function because we don't need to do anything else. We print out all the users so we can see the list 1.something, 2.something. This is easy for the user to select the indexes instead of typing in the whole names. So we say enter an index, we take that index and we -1 to it, and the reason why we do that is because they're entering a human index which is 1 based, and we need it to be 0 based, which is what our people object takes in. So we can run --, which will take 1 off this value to convert it from a 1 based to a 0 based. If you want to use other methods like -=1 like this, or you could say index equals index -1, that's up to you. This is just the method that I prefer personally. After we've accepted the new integer value, we can say if the selection is greater than or equal to 0 and the index selection is less than or equal to the people count -1, then it's successful. And the reason why it's 0 is because it's 0 based, and people count -1 because people count returns back 2 because there's 2 items, but we want to have the upper bound, which is people count -1, hence 2 minus the 1 gives us the 1. So the lower bound is 0 always, and the upper bound is the count -1 item. Once we've validated our range checking, we'll go inside into our try catch. We'll return a person, and return person is our new function that'll just return us back a person based off a name and an age, and it will also validate it and validate the age and return us back their details. Just a quick tip, if you use Control-click to click onto a function, like I just did and showed you there, you can use this back arrow to go back to where you just were. It's very handy when you've got a big code base and you don't want to be jumping very quickly. So after you return a person, we make sure it's not null. If it is null, then we know something's went wrong and we can loop the function. If it isn't null, then we return back a user and everything's went fine. What we can do there is we can take our people object and our index selection that our user selected in the first place, we will replace that with whatever person has been returned from the console inputs. We'll print a message and return back to the menu. If any of these things go wrong, like if person selection was incorrect, or something's went drastically wrong inside the person function, or they have entered an invalid range, or there's been an exception, then we always output the message and then loop the function again so they can always edit a user. And if you wanted to in here, you can actually let the user type in something like -1 for the index, just to make sure that if they come into the edit by accident, they can always edit that out, but maybe that's something that you want to do in your own time. We've officially finished the edit function. For the search person, we need to check if people in system, get name input, validate name, loop, and check for name, output results, return back to menu. And the same thing for remove person, we can check if people in system, and then output list of users, input selection, validate selection, and then print message, return back to menu. Perfect. So now that we've planned out search person and remove person, that'll be it for part 3. Please stay tuned for part 4 and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm going to be making a C# course coming up soon, so keep your eye out. In the meantime, if you want to check out my Patreon to support the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it.